The selection hall of the Vel'karian royal palace was designed to overwhelm. Crystal pillars that reached toward impossible heights. Bioluminescent displays that shifted through colors meant to evoke awe and submission. Seating arranged in ascending tiers, so that everyone could see the central platform where Crown Princess Sera Vel'thorn stood, alone, waiting for her future to be decided by others. Marcus Webb stood in the diplomatic observation section, uncomfortable in formal attire that had been carefully chosen to respect Vel'karian customs while maintaining human dignity. As Earth's junior diplomatic liaison, he was here to observe, to learn, to report back on Vel'karian succession customs. Not to participate, never to participate. But watching what was happening made his role as passive observer increasingly difficult. The ceremony had been going for 2 hours. 20 noble houses had been presented, each sending forward their heir as a potential mate for the crown princess. A bond that would form powerful political alliances, secure succession, and shape the empire's future. And 20 houses had declined, politely at first, then less so as the pattern became undeniable. Princess Sera stood at the center of attention, her 8-foot frame draped in formal robes that shimmered with embedded bioluminescence. She should have been commanding. Vel'karians valued size, strength, and what they called presence. But her bioluminescent patterns were dim, flickering with colors that Marcus's cultural database identified as nervousness and shame. Her mother, Queen Ashara, sat on the throne at the hall's far end. Her patterns were rigidly controlled, neutral colors that betrayed no emotion. But Marcus could see the tension in her posture, the way her hands gripped the throne's arms. House Krexthar respectfully declines this proposed alliance. The herald's voice echoed through the chamber. They require compatibility in core values. Translation: they think she's weak. Marcus had done his research on Vel'karian culture. They valued dominance, aggression, loud presence. Leaders were expected to command through force of personality, to intimidate and overwhelm. Gentleness was weakness. Thoughtfulness was indecision. Empathy was liability. Princess Sera possessed none of the valued traits and all of the dismissed ones. The murmuring in the hall grew louder with each rejection. By the 15th house, some weren't even bothering with polite excuses. House Vel'mer declines. The princess does not meet our standards for strength of character. Sera's patterns dimmed further. She stood there, maintaining what dignity she could while being systematically told she wasn't good enough, that she was defective, that no one wanted her. Marcus felt his jaw clenching. This was cruel. This was public humiliation dressed up as ceremony. House Vel'karian declines. We seek partners of greater presence. 20 rejections. 20 noble houses looking at the crown princess of the empire and saying, not good enough. The queen's control was cracking. Marcus could see it in the way her patterns flickered despite her attempts to keep them neutral. 3 more houses declined. 23 total. Every single noble house with eligible heirs had rejected the crown princess. The hall fell into uncomfortable silence. Sera stood alone, her patterns now barely visible, the Vel'karian equivalent of wanting to become invisible, to escape, to disappear from this moment. The queen rose from her throne. Her movements were too quick, too sharp. Her control broke. No one wants my daughter as a mate. Her voice cracked with anguish that was shocking from someone so powerful. The raw emotion violated every Vel'karian norm about royal composure, about showing strength, about maintaining dominance. She is crown princess, heir to the empire. She is brilliant, smarter than half the nobles in this room. She is kind, shows mercy and consideration that strengthens rather than weakens. She is capable, has studied governance and diplomacy since childhood. The queen's patterns were cycling through colors wildly now: grief, rage, helplessness. And you all reject her because she doesn't roar loud enough for your comfort. Because she thinks before she acts. Because she shows mercy instead of dominance. Because she is herself instead of performing the narrow role you demand. The court was silent, uncomfortable. This public display of emotion was itself considered weak by Vel'karian standards. The queen was undermining her own authority by showing vulnerability. But Marcus saw something else. He saw a mother's grief for her child. Saw someone finally, publicly naming the cruelty that had just occurred. Sera was still standing at the center of the platform, still maintaining her dignity despite everything. Her patterns were almost invisible, but she held her head high, her back straight. That image decided it. Marcus stepped forward from the observation section. "I'll accept her." The hall erupted, every head turned toward Marcus, a human. Stepping forward, volunteering for something that 23 Vel'karian noble houses had rejected. "The human liaison," someone started. "The diplomatic observer," someone else said. "What is this?" Multiple voices overlapped. The queen's patterns flashed through colors Marcus didn't have translation for. Shock, confusion, something else. Sera looked directly at Marcus for the first time. Her large eyes, more prominent than Vel'karian standards considered ideal, another mark of her defectiveness, showed confusion and something that might be hope. "Silence!" The queen's voice carried command despite her earlier emotional display. The hall quieted. She looked at Marcus. "You are human. You have no standing in Vel'karian succession matters, no noble house, no political authority to offer alliance." "I'm not offering alliance," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes on him. "I'm offering acceptance. You said no one wants your daughter. I'm saying I do, not for politics, not for power, not for alliance, just because she deserves someone who sees her value." "This is absurd," one of the nobles said. Marcus recognized him as the head of House Krexthar, one of the early rejectors. "The selection ceremony is for forming proper alliances between noble houses. A human liaison with no standing cannot possibly." "Can I speak?" Sera's voice cut through the noise. It was quiet but clear. Everyone stopped. Marcus realized that Sera rarely spoke in these formal settings, and when she did, people weren't accustomed to actually listening. "The selection laws state that any acceptable candidate may present themselves for consideration. I reviewed the laws extensively before this ceremony. I knew this possibility existed." Her voice was steady despite her dim patterns. "There is no species restriction. There is no requirement for noble house affiliation. The law requires only that the candidate be adult, of sound mind, and able to provide support and partnership to the crown princess in her duties." She looked directly at Marcus. "The human meets all legal requirements. If he is willing to accept what 23 noble houses rejected, I am willing to hear his formal petition." The queen stared at her daughter with something like surprise. Then she looked at Marcus. "You understand what you're offering. You would bind yourself to the succession of an empire that doesn't fully trust your species. You would subject yourself to our laws and customs. Accept a position that carries enormous responsibility, but from which you cannot possibly benefit politically. Humans have no standing in our government." "I understand I'm offering to partner with someone who has been treated terribly by people who should have seen her worth. Everything else, we can figure out as we go." The queen studied him for a long moment. Her patterns cycled through colors that Marcus's database couldn't quite translate, emotions too complex or too alien for simple interpretation. Finally, "Very well. The human Marcus Webb of Earth has presented himself as candidate for partnership with Crown Princess Sera Vel'thorn. By law, she has the right to accept or reject this petition." She turned to her daughter, and for the first time since the ceremony began, her voice softened. "Sera, this is your choice." Sera looked at Marcus, really looked at him. He was 6 feet tall, tiny by Vel'karian standards. No scales, no bioluminescent patterns, no natural armor. Completely alien in appearance and culture. But his eyes were kind. And he was the only person in this hall of hundreds who had stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. "I accept his petition. We will proceed with the formal bonding process according to law." The court erupted again. This time the queen let them talk, her patterns showing something that might be relief despite the massive scandal that had just occurred. Marcus caught Sera's eyes across the distance between them. She gave him the tiniest nod, acknowledgement, gratitude, something he couldn't quite name but that felt important. He just changed both of their lives. He hoped he hadn't just made a terrible mistake. But looking at Sera's patterns, which were finally showing colors other than fear and shame, seeing something that might be hope emerging, he thought maybe, possibly, this could be the right kind of mistake. The kind that changes things for the better. The aftermath was chaos. Marcus was immediately surrounded by officials, advisors, and diplomats, all trying to explain why what he'd just done was impossible, illegal, scandalous, or unprecedented. Sera was rushed away by her attendants before they could speak further. Within an hour, Marcus found himself in a formal meeting room with Queen Ashara, several Vel'karian advisors, and Earth's ambassador, his boss, Sera Torres, who looked both impressed and terrified by what he just committed to. "Do you understand the enormity of what you've done?" Torres asked. "You've accepted a formal petition to bond with alien royalty. This isn't dating, Marcus. This is legally binding partnership with succession implications. You've just made yourself a potential prince consort of an empire. I understand it's complicated. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it." Torres pulled up documents on her tablet. Earth's diplomatic corps has protocols for relationships with alien citizens. We do not have protocols for marrying into alien royalty. We're in unprecedented territory. "Why?" Queen Ashara asked directly, her patterns carefully controlled again. "Why would you involve yourself in Vel'karian succession politics? What does Earth hope to gain from this?" "Earth gains nothing," Marcus said. "This isn't about politics or gaining advantage. It's about seeing someone being treated cruelly and deciding not to be part of that cruelty." "You pity her." The Queen's patterns flashed with colors that looked like anger. "No. I respect her. There's a difference." Marcus leaned forward. "Your daughter stood there with dignity while 23 noble houses publicly rejected her. She maintained composure while her worth was systematically denied by everyone with power. That's strength, just not the kind your culture recognizes. You don't understand Vel'karian culture. I understand that every culture has blind spots, things they value that shouldn't be valued, things they dismiss that shouldn't be dismissed." Marcus met the Queen's eyes. "Your culture values dominance and loud presence, but quiet strength matters too. Thoughtfulness matters, kindness matters, empathy matters. Your daughter has those qualities in abundance, and you're all treating them like defects." One of the advisors spoke up. "Those qualities are liabilities in leadership." "Are they? Or have you just convinced yourselves of that because they're not what you're used to?" Marcus looked around the room. "I've studied your history. Some of your empire's greatest disasters came from leaders who acted on aggressive impulse, without thinking through consequences. Some of your greatest successes came from careful diplomacy and consideration. But you don't celebrate the careful thinkers. You celebrate the dominators. Maybe that's a mistake." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Her patterns shifted to colors that might indicate contemplation. "You're correct that I don't see gentleness and thoughtfulness as strengths in the way you seem to. But I see that my daughter has those qualities. And I see that they have made her vulnerable in our society, rejected, dismissed, considered defective." Her voice carried pain despite her controlled patterns. "As her mother, I want her protected and valued. None of our noble houses would provide that. And you think I will. I think you already have. By stepping forward when no one else would. By seeing value where others saw only weakness." She leaned forward slightly. "The bonding process takes 3 months. You'll live in the palace, spend time with Sera under proper supervision, learn our customs and laws. At the end of that period, you both must formally consent to the permanent bond. Either party can withdraw at any time with no penalty. Use that time to determine if this is truly what you want, and if you can truly provide what my daughter needs." Over the following days, Marcus settled into the strangest situation of his life. He was given quarters in the palace, a suite designed for visiting dignitaries, modified for human proportions. He was provided with guides to Vel'karian customs, bonding traditions, and succession law, and he was given supervised time with Sera to begin the formal courtship process. Their first real conversation happened 3 days after the ceremony. Marcus was in the palace gardens, a massive complex of bioluminescent plants and crystalline water features, having gotten lost trying to find his way back to his quarters. You stepped forward. Marcus turned to find Sera standing on a path behind him. She was wearing simpler robes than her ceremonial attire, her patterns showing colors that seemed calmer than in the selection hall. I did, Marcus confirmed. Why? Because what was happening to you was wrong, and I could do something about it. Sera moved closer, sitting on a nearby bench. You could have done nothing like everyone else. Yeah, but then I'd have to live with having done nothing when I could have helped. Couldn't accept that. You don't know me. You know nothing about me except that I was rejected by everyone else. Why would you accept someone no one else wants? Marcus sat on a different bench, giving her space. I saw someone with quiet dignity being treated like she was worthless. That told me more about them than about you. Also, for what it's worth, I don't think being gentle or thoughtful or kind are weaknesses. I think they're strengths that your culture doesn't value. But that's their failing, not yours. Sera's patterns shifted to colors that Marcus's database labeled as surprise. Everyone says I'm defective, that I should be more aggressive, more commanding, more dominant, like my mother, like a proper crown princess. Everyone's wrong. You're just different from what they expect. Doesn't make you defective, just makes you yourself. They talked for 2 hours, about Earth and Vel'kar, about human and Vel'karian cultures, about the pressures of living up to impossible expectations. It was, Sera would later say, the first conversation she'd ever had where someone actually listened to her answers, instead of waiting for her to finish so they could tell her how she should be different. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sera spent time together as the bonding process required. They walked in gardens, shared meals in private dining rooms, talked about their different worlds and vastly different perspectives. Marcus learned about the pressure Sera had been under her entire life. I tried to be what they wanted, she told him during one of their evening walks. I trained in combat arts even though I hate violence. I practiced commanding presence even though it felt like performing a role. I studied dominance tactics even though they go against everything I believe about how to treat people with respect. Her patterns dimmed slightly, but I couldn't sustain it. The real me kept showing through, and they called it defective, called it weakness. My own mother kept trying to push me to be more like a proper Vel'karian, more like what a crown princess should be. Being yourself isn't defective. Being myself means being rejected by my entire society. Being yourself means being rejected by people who can't see your value. That's different. Those people are wrong. Sera looked at him with those large eyes. Why do humans see things so differently? Because Earth taught us that strength comes in many forms. We survived as a species not because we were the biggest or strongest or most aggressive. We survived through cooperation, through adapting, through intelligence and empathy. Marcus paused. We learned that the loudest voice isn't always the wisest one. That gentle doesn't mean weak. That thinking before acting is smart, not cowardly. Your culture values what mine dismisses. And vice versa, probably, but yeah, your culture values one narrow type of strength. Humans learn to value many types, including yours. The queen watched their growing connection with complex emotions that showed in her increasingly unguarded patterns when she thought no one was observing. She'd always loved her daughter, but she'd also spent Sera's entire life trying to push her to be different, to be more Vel'karian, to fit the mold of what a crown princess should be. Seeing Marcus accept Sera exactly as she was, seeing her daughter's patterns glow brighter with each day, seeing her become more confident, more herself, forced the queen to confront her own complicity in the system that had hurt her child. One evening, she asked Marcus to walk with her privately through the palace's formal gardens. "My daughter is happier than I've seen her in years," the queen said, her patterns showing colors that might indicate regret. "You've given her something I couldn't, acceptance without demands to change who she is." "You're her mother," Marcus said carefully. "Why couldn't you give her that?" "Because I was raised in this culture, taught these values from birth. I love Sera, but I also spent her entire childhood trying to push her to be more what I thought she needed to be to survive in Vel'karian society. More dominant, more commanding, more aggressive." Her patterns pulsed with grief. "I see now that I was wrong, that I was trying to change something that didn't need changing. But seeing it now doesn't undo years of pressure and criticism and disappointment. It's not too late to tell her that. To tell her you see her value now. I've damaged our relationship. I don't know how to repair it. Maybe start by being honest. Tell her what you just told me. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to actually see her for who she is and value that person." The queen was quiet for a long time, her patterns cycling through colors Marcus couldn't fully interpret. "You're quite different from what I expected when humans first made contact with the Empire. More perceptive about emotional matters than our diplomatic exchanges suggested. Humans are good at emotions. It's kind of our thing. We feel them intensely, and we've gotten good at talking about them because bottling them up makes us miserable. Vel'karians see emotional expression as weakness. Vel'karians are missing out then. Emotions give you information. Ignoring them doesn't make you strong. It just makes you less informed about what matters." As the bonding ceremony approached, Marcus found himself genuinely nervous. He was about to commit to partnership with someone from another species, another culture, with massive political implications he still didn't fully understand. But when he was with Sera, it felt right. She was brilliant, could discuss governance and diplomacy with nuance he rarely encountered. She was funny, had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was kind, showed consideration for everyone from palace staff to foreign dignitaries. She was becoming important to him, not as a princess, as Sera. The night before the ceremony, she asked to speak with him privately. "Are you certain about tomorrow?" She was standing by a window in one of the palace's countless sitting rooms, her patterns showing colors that looked like anxiety. "You can still withdraw. No one would blame you for deciding this is too complicated. Are you trying to give me an out? I'm trying to make sure you're choosing this freely, not out of pity or obligation or stubbornness. I'm choosing you because I've got to know you over these months and I genuinely like who you are, because I think we could build something good together, because..." He paused, finding the right words. "Because you're worth choosing, Sera. That's not pity, that's recognition of value, that's respect, that's more than that actually." Her patterns glowed brighter than he'd ever seen them, colors his database identified as joy and hope. "I choose you too. Not because you were the only option, though you were, but because you're the right option, because you see me, really see me. That's rare, that's valuable, that's everything I didn't think I'd ever have." The bonding ceremony was deliberately smaller than the selection ceremony would have been. No grand court assembly. Just close family, a few friends, Earth's diplomatic staff, essential officials. The queen presided, her patterns showing genuine happiness for the first time Marcus had witnessed. When he and Sera exchanged their formal vows, his in carefully practiced Vel'karian, hers in impressively fluent English, something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but people started to see the princess differently, started to question whether their dismissal of her had been as justified as they'd assumed. If the human could see worth where they saw weakness, maybe they were missing something important. Months later, Sera began taking more active roles in governance. She brought different perspectives, prioritizing diplomatic solutions over military ones, emphasizing long-term stability over short-term power demonstrations, showing consideration for smaller member species in the empire. Some criticized it as weakness, but others noticed that her approaches often worked better than traditional methods. That conflicts resolved through careful negotiation stayed resolved. That treating allies with respect created more loyalty than treating them with dominance. The empire began, slowly, to change, not because Marcus imposed human values, but because Sera finally had the support and confidence to be herself and show that her way of leading had merit. A year after the bonding ceremony, Marcus stood with Sera on a palace balcony overlooking the capital city. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Stepping forward that day, your life would be much simpler if you'd stayed in the observation section." "Simpler maybe, but not better." Marcus took her hand, a human gesture she'd learned to appreciate. "I got to know an amazing person, got to see someone flourish when given space to be themselves, got to be part of something that's actually changing things for the better. No regrets. I was taught my entire life that I was defective, that who I naturally am was wrong and needed to be fixed." Her patterns glowed with warm colors. "Then you stepped forward and said, 'That's not defective, that's just who you are, and who you are is valuable.' That changed everything, not just for me personally, but for how this empire understands strength. You changed things. I just gave you room to be yourself. That's what I needed, what I never had before. Someone who saw me clearly and valued what they saw." She looked at him with those large eyes that were no longer considered a defect, but simply hers. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. Not despite who they are, but because of it.